presentation is part of my science, psychiatry, medicine videos, and it is about my professional journey from immunology and oncology to neuroscience and psychiatry. Interdisciplinary research fosters fruitful discoveries. And it can also be part of my biomedical artist newsletter because it shows my path, what led me to positive psychiatry and to exploring the role of ballet and art as a healing modality. I've had always interest in dancing, ballet, and art since a little girl, even before science. And I've mentioned before that since my parents were biomedical scientists, from a little girl they instilled in me the love of science. However, in science, I love the discovery process. I love the learning of new things, the opportunities to make an impact, to discover the mechanisms of disease so that you can treat people, but I don't appreciate the academic competition, and sometimes I think you need a certain personality with a greater ego that is more prone to fighting in order to get your way, which is not my personality. So I think this makes it more difficult sometimes for me to survive in an academic environment. And now, I want to say, because I've been working in neuroscience and psychiatry since quite a long time, but my professional path started with immunology. And so I wish to share my earlier career path, starting from my PhD right after my MD, which led me to neuroscience and psychiatry, and ultimately to ballet as positive psychiatry, and how my early path in immunology and oncology enriched my knowledge and experience in biomedical sciences together with neuroscience and psychiatry and medicine. And I think that this may be beneficial to share. One example, like in science career, there are features of different career paths. There may be people just beginning their career journey, so I wish to share mine, which may be useful. And also is evidence for hiring managers that not only the past several years of professional experience of a job candidate are important when hiring and evaluating the candidates, but also the earlier professional experience shapes valuable and lasting professional skills and knowledge. Just like the early years in a childhood development play a crucial role for the functioning of the child as an adult. And these are skills and knowledge which are assimilated and they matter later on. And also I wish to share my journey as biomedical science discoveries, and it is based on the ideas that the systems in our body are interconnected. The brain, the body, the different body systems, and they share common signal transduction pathways, common genetic, epigenetic, biochemical, and molecular mechanisms. And knowledge in one specialty may help make a discovery in another. It may foster innovative problem solving. And when entering a new specialty, a scientist looks at the problems with fresh vision, not already knowing what is known, but open to many questions, to many different solutions, and looking at problems with fresh eyes, like a novice, may help the scientist to see significant things that people working for a long time don't notice. This, I think, is something similar to taking the same path every day to work, or having the same morning routine. When you start doing things on an autopilot and you don't notice many details in the surrounding environment. And another reason is that the mind-body interactions are increasingly recognized in biomedical science as being important in health and disease. And having scientific experience in several biomedical areas will give you a broader knowledge about the interactions between the brain and the body. And another reason I wish to share this is that this will be useful because I'm applying for a job for my dedication to discover treatments for human diseases, both pharmacological and non-pharmacological. And I wish to show that I have the necessary knowledge to make discoveries and to evaluate side effects and to have innovative ideas. And for example, a drug targeting the immune system, such as interferons, or may give central nervous system side effects because of common mechanisms, and having a broader knowledge will help to predict this. When you do the clinical trials and you design a drug, you will have a better idea what kind of side effects to expect. And another reason I mentioned early on, this is a bridge to my interest in ballet is positive psychiatry. My experience showed me that ballet, when it is danced recreationally, is a very physiological approach to maintain optimal functioning of all body systems, including the central nervous system, and to treat and prevent many diseases. And so I want to say that my early professional path after medicine started with a PhD in monoclonal antibodies for in vivo immunodiagnosis and immunotherapy in humans. And I conducted it at an institute, National Drug Institute, which is something similar to the Food and Drug Administration. And my thesis was centered around production of mouse monoclonal antibodies, and how to assure their characteristics. Similarly, how to the FDA approves new biologics, whether they are specific for the antibodies, whether they cross-react with other antigens, with other human tissues besides the intended, so that we may anticipate any side effects, whether they cross-react with blood cells, which would be highly undesirable. And I studied monoclonal antibodies to melanoma, associated antigens B and T lymphocytes. Then I decided to further advance my knowledge in this, and I became a postdoctoral fellow at the Wistar Institute in Philadelphia after I wrote my own NIH Fogarty grant on development of radioimmunoconjugates for cancer targeting. And at the Wistar Institute, I constructed, using PCR in a baculovirus system, genetically engineered bispecific antibodies to the EGF receptor and other tumor-associated antigens. And so my purpose was to gain a better understanding how we can make antibodies that are for therapy but are less immunogenic, because the humanized antibodies will be a lot less immunogenic for humans than the mouse. However, when I was on the path of oncology and immunology, an old friend of my dad, Dr. Weiss, called me one day out of the blue. Someone had left his lab, and knowing my expertise in molecular biology, he invited me to work in his lab as a postdoc at Drexel University, pharmacology, neuropharmacology, on 2 projects, both centered in developing antisense RNA expressed by a plasmid vector. The idea was that if we inject the antisense RNA, it will express for a long time and silence the gene that we wish to silence. And I had to design antisense RNA to calmodulin, an ubiquitous calcium-binding protein present in nerve cells and all cells of the body, because we know calcium is very important for all biological processes, and especially for neurotransmission. And the other one was to design and to construct an antisense RNA to the D2 receptors. And when I constructed the antisense RNA to calmodulin, I used the PC12, that's a rat cell chromocytoma immortalized cell, and I saw that the cells stopped dividing and they grow neurites, so they differentiate. And that was amazing, because this shows that if you introduce antisense RNA, you can make the tumor cells stop dividing antisense RNA to calmodulin and start to differentiate. And so Dr. Weiss was more interested in pursuing a more nervous system neurotransmission path with these discoveries, but coming from oncology, I was interested to see if this calmodulin antisense RNA would stop the growth of tumor cells of breast cancer and glioblastoma, which it did show promise. And at I was constructing the antisense RNA, I attended conferences for gene therapy in Philadelphia, and I listened to lectures from scientists from the Rockefeller University. And when I had to apply for a job, I saw a postdoctoral position as a scientist professor at the Rockefeller University in neuroendocrinology, and I became interested in neuroscience and took this path of neuroendocrinology, the oxytocin receptor, and from there neuroscience and psychiatry. And for the sake of time, I might talk another time about the second part of my professional path in neuroscience and psychiatry, but I want to say a little bit why this early immunology-oncology path is so important for neuroscience and psychiatry. First, we know that monoclonal antibodies are used as immunotherapy in not only immunologic diseases in oncology, but in neurology and psychiatry, for Alzheimer's disease and for other neurological disorders, and so knowledge of their production and their safety would be very valuable in neuroscience and psychiatry. Calmodulin is a key protein in neurotransmission, signal transduction, and therefore is present, as I said, in tumor cells and in normal cells, in brain cells and cells of the body. So it links the different specialties, and something discovered about calmodulin in the nervous system could apply to CNS tumors and other tumors such as breast cancer. For example, another link between psychiatry and oncology are drugs, antipsychotics, the phenothiazines. They are first-generation antipsychotics that are useful for treatment of schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, although with side effects, and they're also being explored as drugs for managing of certain tumors, precisely because they block calmodulin and dopamine receptors. And also phenothiazines, such as chlorpromazine, are used as antiemetic in oncology after radiation therapy. And for example, autism, a neurologic psychiatric disorder, is an immune inflammatory condition and involves dysfunction of learning and memory at the same time. In rapamycin, a drug used in oncology that suppresses the mTOR pathway and inhibits tumor cell growth, is also important for protein synthesis, learning, memory, and perhaps cognition in disorders such as Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, tuberous sclerosis complex, which is manifested with autism and epilepsy. Corticosteroids, which are used in oncology, and they are immunosuppressants and for treatment of allergic diseases, and in organ transplantation, they may have serious psychiatric side effects such as depression and anxiety. And therefore, I gave these medications as examples that both biological, the monoclonal antibodies and chemical drugs, the corticosteroids and rapamycin, that when a scientist has worked in several disciplines, they can make a better connection between seemingly isolated processes in the nervous system, in the peripheral systems, and endocrine system, in the cardiovascular, and the brain, the endocrine and immune system are in constant communication, and this underlies psychoneuroimmunology. A scientist with a broad background is better positioned to recognize shared molecular pathways, neuroinflammation signaling pathways, neurotransmitters that might be implicated in disease and across different systems, such as the immune system role in brain development and function, which is linked to certain psychiatric disorders. And so a multidisciplinary background provides a wide area of tools, methodologies, and perspectives enabling innovative solutions that very narrow specialists might overlook. And this also, having worked in several disciplines, inspires people to ask new, unconventional questions. And I think this is a little bit similar to the cultural awareness that one might obtain after traveling a lot and spending a longer time in a country to get to know the people and their customs. And if you spend longer time in several countries, you will have better cultural awareness also of their behavior. In one example of innovative problem solving, due to my experience in several biomedical science areas, was that I made a discovery about the role of eukaryotic elongation factor 2 kinase, which I learned about from work on calmodulin and cancer. I discovered its role in metabotropic glutamate receptor, long-term depression, a form of learning and memory in hippocampus when I was a fellow in neuroscience. And so had I not worked with this kinase, I wouldn't think of studying it when I studied the molecular mechanisms of learning and memory in the brain. And currently, my main interest, as I mentioned, is positive psychiatry and ballet. And I think ballet acts on the body and the brain. It reduces stress and promotes well-being, allows for emotional expression, and this is an excellent non-pharmacological tool for the prevention and therapy of brain and oncologic diseases. And indeed, ballet has shown promise in treatment of depression, anxiety, in improving of the condition of women after breast cancer surgery, in early Parkinson's disease, and in Alzheimer's disease and cognitive disorders. And so I'm happy to discuss in more detail my professional experience in immunology, oncology, and neuroscience and psychiatry, And if you wish to invite me for a seminar in your organization or department, I'm happy to hear from you. And also I will welcome your comments. Thank you very much. Be well.